the legitimacy to do other crimes. So simply because the ICC remain as a lawyer, remain as a law player, and if there is a severe harm or severe crime that happen like the Milosevic war, so actually they doing such kind of things. However, in this case, actually to encourage democracy, actually the ICC doing such kind of things, it is totally wrong. It is not good. No, thank you. And moreover, we say, therefore, the America doesn't agree with ICC. So simply because America want to encourage the democracy, however, as a result, they are killing a lot of people in Sweden by the people also. So therefore, they don't want to send their soldiers to the ICC or sometimes the other international criminal court or so on, Mr. Speaker. So therefore, we say it is a totally different thing. The characteristics ICC is totally different. No, thank you. And if it doesn't work, actually the ICC protects the very, very bad situation like the Milosevic or some kind of things. Because, so therefore we say it is not good. And secondly, we say about the internal change. But simply because under the status quo, the internal change is happening very gradually, Mr. Speaker. Because, but after taking proposal, such kind of act infringed by the Western intervention of the opening government like Sweden. So simply because such kind of Syrian people hate the Al-Assad maybe. However, also they more hate the American or some kind of the other Western regime or so on. So therefore we say this intervention of the military act and this intervention of the Western ICC or so on, actually it causes the antipathy towards the citizen, Mr. Speaker. And if it happens, actually the people more support Al-Assad as a hero of the resist to the America or resist to the West itself, Mr. Speaker. So therefore we say the opposite people who are against the Al-Assad seen as same as the West. They seen as same as supporting the West, Mr. Speaker. And they gradually losing such kind of things. And moreover we say, even if they intervene such kind of things, actually maybe the Syrian people choose other dictator or so, that's simply because they hate such kinds of American people. They hate Western people. So therefore we say that even after taking proposal, democracy will not happen. That's simply because opposition party will lose the legitimacy from the people. So therefore we are very proud to oppose this.
ICC is doing this to spread democracy, Mr. Speaker. Mr. saying, then why aren't you doing this economic sanction, Mr. Speaker? Let me just tell you why, right? Because we think there is a necessity to punish this dictator, because we think that person has committed a crime. Economic sanction doesn't directly punish that dictator. At the end of the day, you're taking a very soft stance, in terms of, let's just try to ignore this problem. But what we're doing on the government side is we're trying to clearly show internationally that this specific person has committed a crime against humanity as a whole, and that taking a progressive stance at the end of the day. But before I move on, yes.
Then are you saying that Iraq war is success? Which in post-conflict, more than 2,000 people was dead because there is civil war.
Mr. Speaker, the Iraq war itself is very controversial, right? There's a various reason why America has intervened into Iraq itself. But secondly, we think the very reason why this conflict is taking place within that region is different. In Syria, the very problem that is existing in Syria itself is one person, this dictator, massively killing these innocent civilians. So with these rebuttals having said, let me move on to my extension, Mr. Speaker. I have two extensions for you. Thank you. I'm going to specifically talk about why specifically this concept of trial is justified and is the best way to take place in the status quo. And secondly, more importantly, I'm going to tell you the tangible effects, tangible message that this is going to have on the international society. So moving on to my first extension. Mr. Speaker, there's a reason why we have to go through this trial, right? Firstly, the legitimacy, right? Opening government has generally given you the necessity and the efficiency that ICC can provide you, in terms of trying this person. But we think there is also legitimacy, right? Because ICC is a representation of international norms, recognition made by several, various countries, Mr. Speaker. It is legally recognized that if ICC sees crimes against humanity taking place, like piracy, genocide, mass killing taking place in a certain nation, there is already legitimacy given by law to intervene and trial a specific person. So we think there is legitimacy. But secondly, we think trial is also a good way to solve this problem, right? Because at the end of the day, as I have told you in my rebuttals, we're specifically punishing this one person who has done something clearly wrong to the entire humanity, that ethnicity at the end of the day. Rather than having a soft stance economic sanctions, being passive about this problem, we think ICC is in the best position to actually tangibly show effects to that dictator and punish that dictator at the end of the day for the crimes that he has done. And secondly, more importantly, my second extension, how it's going to tangibly affect the international society and send messages. Mr. Speaker, under today's motion, we're taking a legal measure, right? We're trying this one specific person, which means the international society is actively taking a stance in approaching crimes against humanity. What is happening in the status quo is in North Korea, Kim Jong-il, right? And in Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, right? These kind of dictators are taking place. However, international society, the norm of current status quo is they are being very passive. They're trying to avoid this problem by saying, this is the sovereignty of these nations, Mr. Speaker. However, at the end of the day, we think if you take a harsher measure in applying this policy, we think there will be a spillover effect at the end of the day, right? Firstly, in terms of incentivizing citizens to be able to stand against dictators, because citizens the side of the government. Mr. Speaker, we heard a lot of discussion about the ICC, etc. ICC is very effective or not. But suddenly, when they already recognized, the people started to recognize what's the problem of their dictatorship. Many protests is happening in Syria, when the people start to talk about what is the better future for their government, what's the new government they want to do. They start to talk about that in protesting. Why the government, just Western intervention, suddenly convened in that way and bringing the suddenly change that idea. We see that the government is capable, and also the people recognize the problem. They are the ones who have to bring the change, who have to fix that problem. We think that is actually the missing part of the side of the government. And secondly, the second speaker of the opening government talked about Arabian political leader, but he gave you the idea internal changes is happening in the nation. Mr. Speaker, I think it's very stupid analysis about him to say about internal movement is already happening. I'm going to tell you in my second argument why is that very ridiculous. But thirdly, very disappointingly, closing government spent too much time in a rebuttal, and her argument started in just about 6 minutes. But she talked about already very ISIS consists of the various nations, etc. We agree, but why the various nations have to intervene in this situation when the citizens of Syria already recognize and when they have a willingness to change the nation? We don't think that analysis is missing from that part until now. I'm very disappointed. But second, then I'm going to move on to my extension now. First, why is harm to Syria? We see that in the process of capturing Al-Assad, we have to necessarily use the military intervention from the first place. Then what is the harm of using military intervention first? The infrastructure of the nation has to necessarily be disrupted in the process of it. Then the people who is dependent on the certain infrastructure, when they see that bombing is happening, when the ground troops is ruining their tribe or ruining their people, then we think that the people who is dependent on the infrastructure will be harmed in the process of it. But secondly, what is the harm of it? There will be necessary the civil war will be happen in a further way. We think that collateral damage is necessary will be happen because when the truth will happen and go in that situation, there will be some people who will hurt, but then more importantly, maybe working up. The more people, probably the more people will be killed in this situation. So this is why the Iraq war, Afghanistan, every situation, people didn't trust about the Western. They had more complicated idea to serve. We see that there is actually burdening citizens in that nation and actually distracting their perception. We see that that is causing more harm, killing more people. We see that that is actually worsening the situation of the Syria in a further way. But secondly, what is more important in my extension is that, and what is the better way? We think that the content is that we think that we are now doing an economic sanction, and also the people is protesting against for government. We think that why? So we think that the example is that U.S. and Turkish official announced that sanction will protest can bring sanction and protest can bring collapse within 6 to 18 months. We think that it's because if EU ban on import, we think that that is actually ruining the oil or natural gas in that Syria, and we can actually biggest impact in that nation. But first, why it actually can't work out? Because we recognize very unique situation of the Syria is actually which is the structure of the government is quite different from Iran or other nations. We think that the DPN said that he mentioned about the like ethnic problem of Sunni and Shia. But the problem is that we think that the government of Syria is uniquely consists of merchants who is having an economic power. Their political complexity is not about the trivial issue unlike other nations. Their political leaders consist of the merchant and economic power. Why is that? Al-Assad's father, when he got position in 1970, he bargained with the merchant, and he promised that, as a promise of this political support from the merchant, he said that he has promised to protect their economic benefit. That is why Al-Assad could maintain his power based on the economic merchant in that nation. We think this what this situation means is that the priority reason to give royalty to Al-Assad is actually economic benefit. Yes,
So how exactly are my economic sanctions actually directly targeting
they can easily push back the Al-Assad in a further way. But secondly, urban changes really happen already. We think that there's a protest is happening, which means they start to form the political ideas in a better way. But once you intervene in this situation, the Western, but the Western, they have to pick a person by themselves, and they have to make a connection between Syrian and Western. Then people think that new leader is picked by the Western government. They don't think that new leader is not picked by their homeland. That's why I'm very proud to oppose.
Thank the member of the commission for her speech. And now, to conclude the case for the government, I call upon the government.
So, Mr. Speaker, today in this debate, the opening opposition started questioning about the scale of revolution. It started questioning about whether how many people died and this is not the right time. We think that itself is very responsible because we see that the reason why we're having this debate is because there is a necessity of stopping this revolution at this very time, right? We see that massive revolution and massive genocide happening in the place by that dictator using military to go against the citizens. We think that point was well delivered through government bench, right? But more than that, we also had this opposition bench talking about ICC, talking about Western representative. We now think that that was already well dealt with by our opening government and also closing government by talking about how ICC is not representative. Especially our member of government talked about how ICC is a representative of United Nations collaborative work, not a U.S. representing body. So we think that should be clear. But more importantly, we think that the opposing opposition is so more serious in their own case because they started talking about how these people want it and they will change over time. We have to wait for this. Now we think this is a very irresponsible response coming from them because first of all, they didn't prove to us why economic sanctions can be justified at this very specific time. But second of all, we think that their whole analysis is actually ignoring the fact that economic sanctions have failed, especially when you compare at the very own situation here and here on the screen. So we think that this debate is whether something about how to punish Syria and how to stop the revolution and the death and the killings of people in these very unstable regions, right? So the questions that the questions that I had is pretty simple. First of all, I want to talk about the very general debate that we had on the opening side about the ICC, the legitimate, and how that was more clarified from our government speech. And second of all, we want to go more deeply into why at this very situation, this policy is very necessary in the very serious case. And we're going to incorporate more of closing opposition's extension into this clash.
Okay, mechanically the ICC may look neutral, but what we are saying is the perception and the impression which the rural people of Syria would get when it's white people from white government coming in and setting up elections. Why is that not Western?
Sir, we think that those perceptions do change over time. If you look at the case of Libya, at first these Libyan people who went against the government actually went against the idea of Western intervention. But however, as the NEAO no-fly zone actually efficiently worked, they started changing their perceptions about the Westerns, like the jihadis, the extreme groups of Libya, actually started talking about how they are very thankful that the Western forces helped them. And also we have many cases. Also, we don't want to make this like an example debate, but we have numerous cases of how these ICC has actually helped establish government, like the case of Yugoslavia and other Syrian countries. So we now want to go on to questions without further ado. First of all, let's just talk about why these trials exist, because we think that throughout this debate, both sides have agreed with the consensus that when there is a fundamental violation of human rights, there needs to be trials. Now we think that with that agreed upon, we see a clear case of Syria threatened. We are not against any autocratic government that has stable government, but we are against it if there is a movement with people in those areas wanting to change the government and the government is using military intervention here and there. We think that in that region, like Singapore, like currently stable country like Singapore, there is a revolution and like massive killings of people there, then maybe there is a time that ICC can step in. We think that's very clear. And also our member of government has told you like how more step further into a case of how ICC actually punishes the leader and how that is justified at this very instead. Especially when you talk about a dictator that killed thousands of people in the revolution time, right? We talked about responsibility, the general principle of justification of how punishment is necessary other than just closing the eyes, waiting, or going the process like until they die, like the case of Libya, right? So we think that should be clear. Moving on to our second question, Mr. Speaker, we want to talk about how this is very important. This is very important at this very time. Now we have a closing opposition with this whole extension about economic sanctions. First of all, as I mentioned to you, they didn't prove to us any justification why economic sanctions was necessary. Because even if you look at the case of Libya, first of all, these NATO forces, they didn't want to intervene, right? They started with economic sanctions. They started sanctioning those oil trade with Gaddafi, because Gaddafi, just like the Assad, the Syrian leader, he was also owning the oil industries and resources of Libya. But like European countries started cutting that trade, but it didn't work, right? Like those military tensions continued. And that is why at the ultimate end, they brought the military intervention as a solution, and we had a very unnecessary longing process of getting rid of the leader. We don't want to see the same consequence, right? Also, the opposing opposition didn't engage in any of the extensions here. Came from the leader, the member of government, which talked about really the spillover effect and why this trial is necessary in Syria at the end of the day. What we told you from the member of government was at this very time when there is a revolution, when there is a change, when there is a will of change of government coming from many Middle Eastern countries, when there is a leadership shift and instability coming from dictatorship countries like North Korea, we think that when this trial will send such message that these leaders cannot be justified and that they should also be very cautious about this. We think that extension is clear and gives a legitimate reason why first we have to stop this revolution, but more than that, we have much more legitimacy to give other social impact, other international impacts to the international sphere, right? Like for instance, Kim Jong-il, after Gaddafi died, we started not allowing these North Korean people living in Libya to enter North Korea, cautious about the social effects and other turmoil that these people can cause. We think that that message being sent to them that you're getting punished because you're a dictator, you're going against people's rights, we think that is a very social message that is needed to these dictators living in these regions and living in these countries. So what have the government like to do today? We're very consistent. We're telling you the necessity of this bill. But more than that, in the closing government, we told you about the justification that's coming from these trials, and also the kind of more important benefits in the international realm that we can achieve at the end of the day. So for these reasons, we're very proud to propose.
Thank you, Government Whip, for a speech. And now to bring the debate to a close, I call upon the opposition.
This bill is not about very concept of justice, right? This bill must be about, even if it's justice, what is the best way to the Syrian people? There is a extension coming from closing oppositions, never engaged with us. And there was cute question coming from closing government, right? There is no justification in economic sanctions, but they prove we can do military intervention. And I think implementation can be justified in your paradigm. With that, I have two questions in this debate. First, ICC. Second, military intervention. First, ICC. All these guys want to talk about it today. ICC have a legitimacy to try the dictator of Syria. The problem is you guys brought the mechanism of military intervention. That is why we think that is bad. But even if that is not true, I think whole ideas about ICC is still bad. Why? Because they undermine the government. When ICC on the trial, they send out the message is your government is not legitimate or capable enough to try your own dictator. That is the only standard and mechanisms ICC always go in this way. That is why new government is not being legitimized by these guys. I think is it Egypt people try their own dictator, Hosni Mubarak, sending out the better message to their people, right? Your government is capable. Your government, rather trying to bring the justice, all the ideas was yelled back. And because it is the Western ideas, like opening up and saying, you make that message. I think this is really the problem. Then closing government within 1 minute extension, I think is undeveloped. They said there's a sending out the message. There's other revenue. You can send out the message in today's society. But I think you guys send out wrong messages, right? Even if there's a problem, even if my action can kill your people, I don't care. Because Western government justice is way more important than life of the people. I think this is the problem. Then she talked about there is all those Korean people is threatening Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un is threatening. I don't think there is any news about that. He just killed more people. But the problem is you sending out the wrong